Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, this one feels different.
Usually we take a stack of articles, maybe a new bestseller, and we try to, broaden the appeal. We look for the everyman angle.
Find a way to make it relevant to everyone.
Exactly. But looking at the stack of notes and research we have in front of us today, I think we need to start with something of a warning label. This deep dive is not for the general audience.
It's really not. And I don't say that to be exclusionary or, elitist. It's just that the architecture of the information we're looking at is designed for a very, very specific type of mind.
That's it.
If we try to water this down or generalize it, we're going to lose the signal completely. The value is in its specificity.
100%. We're looking at a set of texts and notes that are, for all intents and purposes, a user's manual for what the sources call the psychologically intense, analytically gifted, and trauma-shaped mind.
It's a mouthful, but it's precise.
It's very precise. And if that description doesn't immediately ring a bell for you, or if it doesn't make you feel a little bit exposed, then this conversation might just sound like abstract theory.
Right. It might not land.
But if that profile fits, if you are someone who has felt a distinct rupture early in life, and your adaptation to that wasn't to shut down, but to become, well, hypercognizant, then this is for you.
We are talking about what the sources call outcast intelligence. The profile here is so specific. It's someone who, usually because of neglect or abuse or just profound isolation in their formative years, adapted by turning their intelligence into a kind of surveillance system.
A surveillance system. That's a powerful way to put it.
Well, think about it. They didn't feel safe, so they learned to watch. They learned to scan for patterns, for threats, for inconsistencies in the environment. It was a survival tool.
And that's the hook that really got me in the reading. The idea that this brilliance, and we are talking about genuine high-level processing power, isn't just, genetic luck. It's a survival mechanism.
It is. It's the result of a mind that had to map the world because the world wouldn't hold them.
Wow. Let's just sit with that for a second. Had to map the world because the world wouldn't hold them.
Right.
Yeah.
And that creates this core tension that just runs through every single document we have here. The internal narrative for this type of person isn't usually, I'm so smart, look at me.
Yeah.
It's often something much closer to, if I were normal, I wouldn't need to be this smart.
Yes. Oh, that's it. There's a deep-seated feeling that the brilliance is a compensation. It's a payment for a lack of safety or belonging.
Your intellect becomes the only reliable parent you've ever had.
It's the feeling that your brain is a consolation prize for a childhood you didn't get to have. But, and here's where we need to pivot immediately to the mission of this deep dive. We aren't here to wallow in that.
No, absolutely not. The sources are incredibly clear about this.
This is not a therapy session. This is what they call structural education.
That is the key distinction. We are here to explore a very technical difference, a fork in the road, really. The difference between ego hardening and ego integration.
Okay, let's unpack that right now, because those terms sound a little similar, but the sources are adamant that they lead to two completely different lives.
Completely different outcomes. The central argument across all this material is that what we often call genius in our culture, that sharp, defensive, sometimes arrogant brilliance we see, is actually a hardened ego.
Formed under pressure.
Exactly. Like a diamond, it's brilliant, but it's also incredibly rigid. It's defensive. It isolates the self in order to protect it. But there is another path.
The integrated path.
Yes. A more holistic or sage-like genius integrates that same early rupture, that same trauma, without calcifying. The structure becomes stronger, but remains flexible.
So the difference between a mind that becomes a prison, where you're brilliant but you're lonely, misunderstood, and maybe a little angry, and a mind that becomes a sage, it's not the level of intelligence.
No. It is not about IQ points at all. The sources are so clear on this. It is about support and integration. Specifically, it is about the ability to hold what the texts call liminal space. That is the hinge. That's the differentiator.
And before we dive into the mechanics of that, because we are absolutely going to get into the gears of how this works, I just want to reiterate the no-go zones the sources laid out for us.
Super important.
We are not romanticizing trauma. We are not saying pain makes you better or what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Absolutely not. Pain is pain. Rupture is rupture. It's damaging. What we are looking at is a technical reality. If you adapted to that pain with sharp cognition, you have a high-performance engine that was installed to keep you safe.
Right.
The problem is, nobody gave you the manual. And nobody taught you how to turn off the defense system so you can actually connect with people without scanning them for threats.
So this is the structural manual. Let's start at the beginning, then, section 1. The origin story. The sources keep using this phrase, outcast intelligence. Can we break down what that actually means?
It's a fascinating concept. The source notes describe this intelligence as a diamond formed under pressure.
Hmm.
And I think we should really think about the physics of that for a moment.
Okay.
A diamond is valuable, it's beautiful, it's one of the hardest substances known. But it is created by immense crushing weight and intense heat. It's a trauma formation.
So the brilliance is real. It's not a trick. It's not imagined.
It is very real. The sources call it adaptive intelligence. When a developing mind realizes the external world is unstable, maybe the parents are unpredictable, maybe the social environment is hostile, it figures out very quickly it cannot rely on being held,
It can't relax.
cannot relax into the care of others. So it shifts resources. The mind itself becomes hyper-observant. It starts scanning for patterns constantly to ensure its own survival.
It's monitoring the environment. It's a constant threat assessment. If I can predict what happens next, maybe I won't get hurt this time.
Precisely. And that repetition, day after day, year after year, it builds a very specific cognitive profile. This mind becomes exquisitely pattern-sensitive.
It sees things other people miss.
Things they can't see. It also becomes contradiction tolerant, because it has to be. It becomes philosophically recursive, always questioning its own assumptions, and of course it becomes emotionally intense.
I want to pause on that contradiction tolerant part.
Yeah.
Because typically, we think of traumatized kids as being confused or black and white thinkers, but you're saying they actually become experts in complexity.
They have to. Think about it. If your primary caregiver is loving at 9 in the morning and screaming at 10, a standard linear binary logic fails you. You can't just say parent is good or parent is bad.
Because neither is true, or rather, both are true.
Both are true simultaneously. So to navigate that house safely, you have to build a mental model that can hold both truths at the same time without shattering. That forces the brain to build a more complex, non-dual architecture than a child who just has a stable, predictable, boring routine.
There was a line in the text that really it stopped me in my tracks. It said, "This intelligence comes from having to think instead of being held."
It's a heavy line, isn't it?
It is, because it immediately implies a cost. I think for a lot of people who fit this profile, there's a sense of almost shame about their own intellect.
A kind of grief even.
Yeah, grief. Like the depth of their mind is proof of their loneliness. If they had been held, if they had been safe, they could have just been a normal, happy kid playing in the dirt. They wouldn't have been forced to analyze the structural dynamics of the family unit at age 6.
That is the tragedy of it, but it's also the source of its validity. The sources emphasize that this intelligence is not artificial. You didn't fake it to get attention. You built it to survive.
It's earned.
It's earned, but at a high price. And the trap, this is the real danger zone the sources warn about again and again, is believing that the rupture necessitates permanent exile.
Right. The outcast mindset. I am different, therefore I must be alone. No one will ever understand this, so I shouldn't even try.
Yes. The danger isn't being an outsider. The danger is the narrative that says, because I see the world this way, I can never truly connect with people who don't. That is where the prison is built. Brick by intellectual brick.
Okay, so let's look at how this mind sees the world. Because it's not just that you think more, you think differently. This brings us to the section on cognitive architecture. The sources talk a lot about the non-dual frame.
This is where we really get into the density of the processing. A standard analytic mind. The way most of the Western world is educated to think operates on differentiation.
Meaning,
to understand something, you cut it into pieces, you categorize it. This is biology, that is physics, this is an emotion, that is a logical thought. It's all about either or.
Right, it's binary. It splits reality to manage it, to reduce ambiguity.
Exactly. It's a very useful tool for certain tasks. But the mind we're talking about, the trauma-shaped, analytically gifted mind, often retains what you could call a non-dual frame. It sees simultaneity. It can hold two or more apparently contradictory descriptions as valid at the same time.
The best example in the notes, and I really want to spend a minute on this because it's so visual and makes it so clear, is the river example.
It's a perfect illustration of the difference. So imagine a standard analytic thinker looking at a river.
Okay.
They can define it as water moving from point A to point B. That's a geographical or hydrological lens.
Oh.
Or they can look at it poetically and say the river represents the flow of time. That's a philosophical or metaphorical lens.
But they usually swap between those lenses. It is either physical water or a metaphor for time.
Precisely. They differentiate to define. But the dense mind, the listener we're talking to,
What do they see?
the dense mind sees the river as water, time, and geometry all at once. They see it isometrically.
Mm-hmm.
They don't just see it as a metaphor. They perceive that the physical flow of the water and the conceptual flow of time are not just similar, they are the same structural pattern appearing at different resolutions in different domains.
So it's not that one is a metaphor for the other.
No. To this mind, they are instances of the same underlying principle. The meaning isn't stripped away to get to the data. The meaning, the pattern, the structure, that is the data.
Okay, I want to pause here because this sounds beautiful and poetic, but in practice, on a Tuesday afternoon at the office, I imagine this is where the friction starts.
This is exactly where the friction starts.
Because if I'm your boss or your spouse and I ask you a simple, practical question about the river like, is the water level rising? And you start talking about the structural isomorphism between hydrological flow and the passage of time, I'm going to get annoyed.
You're going to get very annoyed. You're going to think I'm being difficult or deliberately obtuse. And that is exactly the communication gap the sources describe.
Yeah.
It's not just a misunderstanding, it's a collision of operating systems.
A collision of operating systems. I like that. Because the standard analytic mind, let's call it the manager mind, is trying to differentiate. I need to isolate one variable, water level. I need to cut everything else away to make a clean, quick decision.
Precisely. You are using differentiation as your primary tool. You are slicing reality into manageable, bite-sized parts. But the person we're profiling, the trauma-shaped or integrated mind, they experience that slicing as a form of violence.
Violence. That feels like a really strong word for a simple conversation about water levels.
It feels like violence to their cognitive system because to them, you aren't just focusing on one part, you are shattering the coherence of the whole. Remember, they adapted to trauma by seeing the whole pattern to stay safe.
Ah, okay.
So when you ask them to ignore the pattern, to ignore the context, it feels like you're asking them to take their armor off in a dangerous world. The source actually calls this a fracture of coherence.
So when I say something like stop being so emotional, just look at the facts, what I'm effectively saying is stop using the very survival mechanism that kept you alive for 20 years.
That is exactly what they hear. And that leads to what the text calls recursive irritation. You get irritated because they won't give you a straight, simple answer. They get irritated because you're asking a blind question that misses the entire point, the entire context.
It's a total deadlock. You're both trying to solve the problem, but you're using incompatible toolkits.
It is. And the big breakthrough in the source notes isn't about deciding which side is right or better. It's about realizing that this is a cognitive style misalignment. You aren't fighting about the river, you're fighting about how to parse the river.
That is such a crucial distinction. It's not that you're broken and it's not that everyone else is stupid. It's that you are running a different operating system. You're running, let's say, integration OS, and they are running differentiation OS.
And integration OS is inherently more resource intensive. It's dense. It carries the weight of the water and the time and the geometry and the emotional resonance. It refuses shallow, decontextualized answers.
Which makes perfect sense if you needed it to survive, but it makes social interaction incredibly difficult.
Incredibly.
Okay, so we have this mind. It's powerful, it's dense, it sees patterns everywhere, but it was born from a rupture. It was born from a fundamental lack of safety. Now we get to the core mechanism of the entire episode, the hinge variable.
This is the most technical part of the deep dive, but it is, without a doubt, the most important.
Yeah.
The sources identify a clear sequence. Rupture leads to liminality, which then leads to reorganization.
Rupture, liminality, reorganization.
Okay? The outcome, whether you become that hardened ego or the integrated sage, depends entirely on that middle step, on what happens in the liminal interval.
Liminality, so that means the in-between.
Well, yeah,
The waiting room, the void.
the suspension, the capacity to tolerate the unknown. The text defines conscious maturity not as knowing all the answers, but as the ability to remain in unresolved complexity without defensive simplification. The Greeks had a word for this, aporia.
Okay, so liminal interval is a great phrase. But let's ground this. We've all been in uncertain situations. Why is this specific type of suspension the difference between becoming a narcissist and becoming a sage? What is actually happening in the brain during that interval?
It's about the tolerance of that aporia, that state of deep puzzlement, of a logical impasse,
Being stuck.
being stuck without panicking. See, when a rupture happens, let's say you lose a job or a relationship ends or you have a crisis of faith or you realize your childhood wasn't what you thought it was, the brain immediately, desperately craves resolution. It wants a new story, and it wants it fast.
Right. I lost the job because my boss is an idiot, or I lost the job because I'm a total failure.
Exactly. Both of those are examples of ego hardening. They are quick, binary, low-resolution fixes that resolve the tension. Boss is bad or I am bad, case closed. Anxiety is reduced for a moment.
But the problem is, neither of those is the whole truth. It's almost certainly more complicated than that.
Correct. They are what the sources call premature codifications. They're simple stories that make you feel safe. The liminal interval is the capacity to sit in that burning, agonizing discomfort of not knowing which story is true yet. It's refusing the quick fix.
And the source argues that for the outcast mind, the one that never had that foundational safety net, that refusal, that waiting is terrifying.
It feels like annihilation. If you weren't held as a child, uncertainty doesn't feel like an open door of possibility. It feels like the floor has just fallen out from under you. So the defensive contraction kicks in.
You tighten up.
You become rigid, not because you're arrogant, but because you're terrified and you're trying to grab onto something solid before you fall into the abyss.
So the arrogance we sometimes see in so-called geniuses, the ones who correct everyone, who can't handle being wrong, who have an answer for everything, that's actually a symptom of panic.
It's panic, dressed up as certainty. It's a failure of liminality. It is premature codification. That's when your language, your ideas, they solidify into doctrine, into dogma. You see this in people who become very dogmatic, very rigid in their beliefs. They use rules to create a false sense of safety because they couldn't tolerate the raw vulnerability of the unknown.
The notes here reference some pretty heavy hitters to back this up. We've got anthropologists, systems theorists. Let's talk about Ilya Prigogine for a second. He won a Nobel Prize for chemistry, not psychology. Why is he in a deep dive about trauma and intelligence?
Prigogine is absolutely essential here because he studied what he called dissipative structures.
Okay, what are those?
They are open systems, like a whirlpool or a living cell or a human ego, that maintain their shape by having a constant flow of energy and matter through them.
Okay, energy in, energy out. Got it.
Right. But his key finding, the Nobel-winning insight, was about what happens when you apply too much stress or energy to one of these systems. It doesn't just break. It hits what he called a bifurcation point. It becomes radically unstable.
It starts to wobble.
It wobbles violently. It enters a state of chaos. And at that point, it has only two possible outcomes. It either collapses into a lower state of order, it basically breaks down, or it spontaneously reorganizes itself into a higher, more complex, more coherent order.
It levels up.
It levels up. But, and this is the crucial connection to our listener, it cannot level up unless it is allowed to enter that chaotic, unstable phase first.
I see exactly where this is going. If you try to stop the wobble,
If you try to stop the wobble, if you harden the ego to prevent the feeling of falling apart, you also prevent the reorganization. You lock the system at its current lower level of complexity. You stay stuck in the trauma response forever because you wouldn't let the old structure dissolve enough to rebuild itself into something stronger.
that is actually a terrifying thought. The idea that our very attempt to keep it together is the one thing preventing us from actually getting better.
It's deeply counterintuitive, isn't it? We're taught that holding it together is strength. But Prigogine's physics and Bateson's psychology suggests that letting it fall apart within a safe container is the only way to upgrade the entire structure.
And Bateson is in here too, Gregory Bateson. What does he add to this?
Bateson adds the layer of pattern and information. He argued that pathology, mental illness, psychological distress is essentially rigidity. It's a stuck pattern. A mind that cannot learn is a mind that is trying to enforce an old pattern on a new reality.
It's like trying to use a map of London to navigate New York City.
And then getting furious at the streets of New York for not matching your map. That is the hardened ego. The integrated ego, the sage, has the courage to throw away the map and just observe the territory as it is.
And then there's Victor Turner, the anthropologist.
Turner gave us the modern concept of liminality. He studied rituals all over the world rites of passage. He noticed that in almost every culture, when you move from one state to another, like from being a boy to a man or a girl to a woman, there's always a middle phase.
The liminal phase.
Yes, you're sent into the woods. You're stripped of your name and your old clothes. You are, in his words, betwixt and between.
You aren't who you were, but you aren't who you're going to be yet. You're nothing.
Exactly. You're in a state of pure potential. And Turner's point was that this phase is scary, it's disorienting, but it is absolutely necessary. If you skip the time in the woods, you never truly become the adult. You just become an old child, stuck in the old patterns.
So bringing this all back to our listener, the outcast intelligence, a lot of them are stuck in the woods.
Many of them are. Or they've built a highly fortified, intellectually brilliant fortress in the middle of the woods, and decided to live there permanently because coming back to the village, to society, felt too dangerous or too disappointing.
Which is a perfect segue to the most practical and, for many people, the most painful part of this whole discussion. We have the origin story, we have the cognitive style, and we have the hinge variable. But now, let's talk about why Friday night drinks are an absolute nightmare.
It's a social interface.
The sources call this the niche problem. And I love how the note here says it in all caps. It is not social anxiety. It is missing data.
This is such a critical validation for the listener. So many people with this profile have been diagnosed with or believe they have social anxiety disorder. And look, they might feel anxious, for sure, but the root cause isn't a fear of people. It's a lack of the tacit curriculum.
The tacit curriculum, the stuff nobody ever teaches you because they assume you just absorb it by osmosis.
Most people learn the social dance implicitly in childhood. You watch your parents interact, you play on the playground, you fight and make up with friends, and you absorb the thousands of unspoken rules of the vibe.
Like, oh, when he smiles like that, he's joking. Or when she looks away while I'm talking, I should probably wrap up my story. It's effortless for them.
It runs on autopilot. But for the trauma-shaped, often isolated mind we're discussing,
They missed the lesson.
they missed the lesson. They were likely in survival mode, remember. They were thinking instead of being held. So they weren't relaxed enough to absorb the subtle choreography. Now, as adults, they're trying to reverse engineer these incredibly complex rules explicitly, in real time, while everyone else is just waltzing around them.
That sounds utterly exhausting.
It is incredibly draining. The source material compares it to trying to drive a car by manually calculating the physics of the engine combustion every single time you press the gas pedal while everyone else just, drives.
The source, Decoding the Social Choreography, lists some of these invisible rules. Let's go through a few. Distinguishing play from threat. That's a big one.
It's huge. If your background is genuinely unsafe, your pattern matching software is calibrated to detect threats everywhere. So when someone at work engages in what they see as light teasing, which is often a social bonding signal in many cultures, you might read it as a genuine attack.
Your alarm bells go off.
Immediately.
Oh.
Or another one, self-deprecation as a safety signal.
Right. When someone says, oh, I'm terrible at this, they are often signaling, I am not a threat to your status. You can relax around me.
But if you don't know that's the rule, you might take them literally and think they're just incompetent. Or worse, you might try to help by correcting them with facts, which completely breaks the social bond they were trying to create.
Mirroring as an alignment cue. Softening your tone to deliver difficult information. The list goes on and on. So the listener is sitting there missing all these subtle signals, feeling awkward and out of place, and their internal conclusion is, there's something wrong with me. I'm broken.
But the source offers a solution that is so perfectly tailored to this profile. It doesn't say just relax. It doesn't say have a drink and loosen up, which is terrible advice.
It says analytical pattern mapping.
Exactly. It says use the engine you do have. You have a massive analytical gift. You think in systems. So stop trying to be intuitive and start being systematic. Treat social interaction as a system to be decoded.
Mechanical learning.
Yes. Stop trying to use an intuitive muscle you were never allowed to develop. Use your analysis. The formula they lay out is signal, response, de-escalation, repair.
Okay, let's get really practical here. The source talks about this mechanical learning. If I'm that person standing at the bar on a Friday, holding a drink, feeling like I'm an alien anthropologist watching humans interact, what do I actually do? The source gives that formula. Signal, response, repair. Can we debug that?
Let's debug it. Let's take a specific input. Someone in the group, let's call him Dave, makes a joke about your shirt. He says something like, who dressed you today? The dark web.
Okay. My internal reaction, the trauma mind, immediately flashes red. Threat detected. He is publicly questioning my judgment. He's insulting my status. My instinct is to crush him intellectually.
Right. Your instinct, your programming, is to respond with overwhelming force. To say, actually, Dave, judging by the synthetic blends and uneven stitching on your jacket, you probably bought that at an outlet mall in 2019, so perhaps you're not one to comment on fashion.
Which would be factually true and would definitely shut him up, but
it would be a social error, a massive one. It escalates what was likely a play signal into a combat signal. You've just nuked the vibe for the entire group.
So mechanical learning requires me to intercept that initial emotional, intellectual reaction.
Yes. You have to run a manual override. You pause for a second and you look at the data points, just like an analyst. Is Dave smiling? Are other people in the group laughing with him or at him? Is his body language open or closed? What was the conversational context just before he spoke?
Okay, let's say he's smiling, the group is relaxed, it's clearly a joke.
Then the algorithm in your head should output.
Yeah.
This is a bonding ritual, mild teasing. The required response is not defense. The required response is mirroring or deflection.
So I need to tease back, but not too hard.
Or, even safer, you engage in self-deprecation. That's a classic safety signal. You smile and say something like, yeah, I'm going for that hacker in a basement chic. It's all the rage in Silicon Valley, I hear.
It feels so calculated, so unnatural.
At first, yes, it is absolutely mechanical. But the sources emphasize this point over and over. This isn't faking it. It is pattern literacy. You are learning the grammar and vocabulary of a language you were never taught as a child.
But it still feels a bit manipulative.
Does it? Or is it just speaking a second language? If you go to France and you have to consciously think about the correct conjugation of a verb before you speak, are you manipulating the French waiter?
No, you're just trying to be understood and show respect.
Exactly. You're just trying to communicate effectively within the established protocol. We treat social intuition like it's some kind of moral virtue. If you don't have it naturally, you're fake or inauthentic. But this frame says, no, you just didn't get the textbook. Here is the textbook. Study it. Practice the exercises.
And the idea is that eventually, like any language, the mechanics become smoother, you stop translating everything in your head, and you just start to speak.
You build new neural pathways. But you have to respect the fact that you need the manual first. The source has that great line. It's acknowledging you have a high-performance engine, but we're never given the manual for the road.
So you have to write the manual yourself by observation and analysis.
You reverse engineer it.
Okay, so we've covered the micro-level social mechanics. Now let's zoom out again to the big picture. Section 5, structural integration, the path forward. We've established that this mind sees the world differently. It sees structure across domains.
Isomorphism, that's the technical term. The ability to see that the branching structure of a tree, the structure of a river delta, the structure of your own circulatory system, and the structure of a decentralized organization often follow the same underlying mathematical patterns.
And the source argues that the outcast mind, because of its unique position, often builds better, more accurate models of reality.
Yes, because it ignores what they call tribal bias. Most people build their reality models based on what their group believes. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. It's a simple, socially coherent story.
But the outcast, who never truly belonged to the tribe,
They don't have that loyalty. They're not invested in the tribe's story, so they can see the naked structure underneath. They see the gears of the system turning while everyone else is just watching the puppet show and cheering for their favorite puppet.
and that is a tremendous gift to the world, a huge potential for insight if, and it's a massive if, the person can figure out how to communicate it without getting rejected by the tribe.
Which brings us right back to the communication gap.
It does, and the source gives a very specific, actionable instruction for navigating the dualistic world with a non-dual mind. It says, you must explicitly instruct people to respond from a non-dual frame.
This is a game changer for your close relationships with a partner, a close friend, a therapist, maybe even a trusted manager. If you are a non-dual thinker, you cannot expect other people to just get it. It's not fair to them. You have to do the translation work.
You have to give them the user manual for your brain.
You do. You have to say things like, hey, I'm about to share something with you. I'm not looking for a solution. I just need you to hold the complexity with me for a minute. Or, I'm feeling both angry and relieved at the same time. Please don't try to make me pick one.
You're teaching them how to listen to you.
You're teaching them your language.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you're also practicing acceptance. You have to accept that their standard operating system defaults to differentiation. When they ask, but are you more angry or more sad? They aren't attacking you. They're trying to help you in the only way they know how. They're trying to slice the problem into a manageable piece.
It's not a personal attack. It's just that cognitive style misalignment playing out in real time.
Right. And just knowing that, just framing it that way, it reduces the recursive irritation. It stops the spiral of misunderstanding before it starts.
The final piece of this structural integration, and it feels like the culmination of everything we've talked about, is metabolizing disruption. We go back to the liminal interval one last time.
The ultimate goal is to build an architecture, a self, that is strong enough to metabolize disruption rather than just armoring against it.
Okay, what does that look like in practice? The source uses the phrase permeability with strength.
Think of a skyscraper that's been designed for an earthquake zone. It isn't a solid, rigid block of concrete. If it were perfectly rigid, the first big tremor would snap it in half.
Right, they're designed to sway.
They're designed to have sway. They have dampers and flexible joints. The design allows the immense energy of the earthquake to move through the structure without shattering it. That is the integrated ego.
As opposed to the hardened ego, which is the underground bunker.
The bunker survives, for sure,
Yeah.
but it is dark, and you are isolated, and you can never leave. The skyscraper stands in the open air, it takes the hit, it sways with the force, and then it settles, and it remains standing. That is the sage perspective. You let the world affect you, you let the pain and confusion in, but you have developed the internal structural integrity to hold it all without collapsing or calcifying.
That is a very powerful image, and it really brings us to the synthesis of this entire deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground here.
We really have. Let's try to recap the arc for the listener who has been on this journey with us. You experienced a rupture early in life. That's the starting point.
You adapted to that rupture by developing a dense analytical brilliance, what we've called outcast intelligence.
That very brilliance then caused a deep sense of isolation because you see connections and patterns where others only see separate categories.
And you felt that friction your whole life. But the path forward isn't to try and get rid of your brilliance. It isn't regression. You can't just dumb yourself down.
And it isn't imitation. You cannot just pretend to be normal. You can't force a holistic, non-dual mind into a dualistic box without causing immense internal distortion and pain.
So the only path left is structural integration.
It is enabling your holistic mode of perception to operate within a dualistic world. It's learning the social choreography mechanically so you can participate and contribute while keeping your unique, deep vision of the world intact.
It's realizing that the very thing that made you feel so lonely, that capacity to see the hidden pattern, the pattern that connects, is actually the thing that allows you to build the most truthful, most comprehensive models of reality. It's your curse, but it is also your gift.
There was a final provocative thought in the text source that I really want to leave everyone with. It's designed to shift the central core of your life.
For a long, long time, the question for this listener has probably been something like, am I brilliant? Or, on darker days, am I broken?
Right. The two poles, genius or failure.
The sources basically suggest we should just retire those questions. We know the answer to the first one. The brilliance is there. It's adaptive. It's real. It's not in question.
So the question itself changes.
The new question becomes, can that brilliance coexist with belonging instead of isolation?
That is the challenge. That's the work.
That is the hinge. It requires holding that liminal space when you're uncertain. It requires having the courage to tolerate the awkwardness of learning the social dance like a beginner. It requires the generosity to translate your complex thoughts for others. But the sources are clear. It is possible.
You don't have to choose between your mind and your humanity. You just have to build a structure that is strong and flexible enough to hold both.
Exactly.
Thank you for going on this deep dive with us. I know this one was dense. I know it was intense. But if you're the listener we think you are, that's probably exactly what you needed.
Take care.
We'll see you in the next one.